Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on SR&ED, Scientific Research and Experimental Development. Please let me know if our stream is online and you can see and hear me well. Okay, thank you. I can see your replies in the chat. Thanks a lot. Feel free to write questions during our webinar. We will answer them at the end of this session. And it is my privilege today to introduce you to our expert, Jamie Dowd, the CEO of CrossDynamix Consulting, who will provide valuable insight into the SR&ED, what it is, who is eligible, the types of activities that qualify, and essential tips for preparing. Whether you are a business owner, a professional in the field, or simply interested in learning more about this tax incentive program, this webinar will provide you with a comprehensive understanding. Let's dive in, shall we? Hi, Jamie. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
It's great talking to you, a big honor. And of course, we're all eager to know what this SR&ED program actually is. So let's start from very beginning. What program is and who benefits from this program?
Sure. Thanks. So SR&ED is well, first of all, it stands for Scientific Research and Experimental Development. And it's a tax incentive program designed to encourage Canadian businesses to conduct research and development in Canada. So that's very important. The individuals involved in doing the work must be Canadian. The objective is to stimulate innovation, economic growth, and create jobs. And it's different than other programs. It's not a grant program. It's actually legislated. It's part of the Income Tax Act. So if your company has done work that meet the requirements of the program, then you're actually entitled to these tax credits by law. So it's a big difference from other grant programs that are out there, and perhaps grant programs that are forward-looking and that you apply for in advance. SR&ED is filed with your tax return, and there's an interaction with your tax return and some of the schedules on it. And it's submitted to CRA, and CRA assesses whether or not it meets the criteria, and then processes the refunds. There's two types of credits, refundable and non-refundable, depending on the type of company. If you're a CCPC, a Canadian Controlled Private Corporation, then the rate that you get back is higher. At the federal level, it's 35% on any expenditures, and we'll talk about what eligible expenditures are. And depending on which province you're in, there's a mix of provincial credits. If you're not a CCPC, then it's a 15% non-refundable credit. Eligible expenditures, so there's three buckets essentially for eligible expenditures. There's salaries and wages. So those are individuals that are typically employees and are T4 salaried. And the second bucket is contract payments, whether it's an individual or a third party that your company is paying to do SR&ED on your behalf. And the third bucket is materials. So salaries and wages works out to be about 68 cents on the dollar for any time spent by employees doing SR&ED work. Contractors, it's 32 cents on the dollar. Those contracts must be arm's length as well. So there's a few caveats to contract payments, and they must also be taxable suppliers. Right. And so Canadian, essentially. There's two types of materials that can be claimed. There's materials consumed and materials transformed. Materials consumed is basically anything that's scrapped. Materials transformed are components or things that become part of a prototype and that are necessary expenses as part of the SR&ED project. There's other payments too, such as third-party payments, where you could be collaborating with a university or some other institution on the project. There are two methods of claiming SR&ED. The first is the proxy method, and the second is the traditional method. Proxy is the one we see the most because there's actually a bump up on salaries and wages to accommodate for overhead. Traditional method is different and a little bit more challenging to claim. because we have to demonstrate to CRA that the expenditure is incremental to the shred project, essentially. So you have to produce a lot more documentation, a lot more information to support any expenditures related to your shred project for the traditional method. As I mentioned, to claim shred, it needs to be filed annually with your tax return. And each year, basically, each fiscal year is assessed in isolation. So CRA will decide to review or not review your shred claim based on a number of factors. They have a risk assessment matrix that they apply to every single shred claim that they receive. And based on that risk assessment, you'll either be selected for review or they will just assess your claim as filed. The schedules that need to be submitted with your tax return, the main schedule is the T661. So that contains all the shred information, and where we input the expenditures and the project descriptions. For each project, we write up a description that contains information about the three criteria, essentially the technological uncertainty. So we need to establish to CRA that the company has encountered a true technological uncertainty. The second criteria is the systematic investigation. So that's usually a description of the iterations, and by iterations, it's the hypothesis, so the idea that you have to address the technological uncertainty, and then the different activities that you performed to test that hypothesis, followed by analysis and then conclusions, essentially. So the third criteria is technological advancement, and this is the key and the aspect of the SR&ED program that is specifically laid out in the Income Tax Act in Section 248(1). 248(1)(c) is experimental development, which is the category that most companies would fall under for SR&ED. And technological advancement is essentially work done for the purpose of creating new knowledge in a field of science, for the purpose of creating new or improved products or processes. And CRA is usually less concerned about the second purpose there. They're more concerned about the first purpose, that you're doing the work to create new knowledge or know-how in a field of science. The CRA service standard is 120 days if you file your claim with your tax return, and 1 year if it's an amended filing. So you have 18 months from your fiscal year end to file a shred claim. And usually you want to file that within the 6-month corporate tax return filing window. And if you do that, then CRA can turn it around in 120 days. All first-time claimants are reviewed. CRA has a risk assessment matrix to determine if your claim is selected for review, and there are many different factors. And if it passes this risk assessment, then your claim could be just accepted as filed, which is the goal. It's important to keep records, and the type of evidence CRA looks for is called contemporaneous evidence. So artifacts that are generated by going through the work and the experiments, and in real time, essentially. So most first-time claimants won't have a lot to show CRA. They are a little bit more lenient with first-time claimants, but at some point, they do expect the level of documentation kept while doing your shred project to reach a certain level. And so just be aware. First time, okay, they might be a little bit lenient with you, but second, third, fourth year, be sure to take any suggestions or advice that they have as far as record keeping. There's no specific thing that they're going to impose as far as record keeping, but you have to have something, and you can consult with your shred advisor on what types of artifacts to keep, given you the context of your business. So now I'll talk about the shred process. There's the submission process, which typically involves technical interviews, so discussing the projects, A SR&ED provider will help you go through a list of candidate projects and determine which ones meet the criteria and which ones don't. And CRA likes to see that as well. So they want to see your SR&ED time versus your non-SR&ED time. And then helping formulate the descriptions and positioning them to meet the 3 criteria that we mentioned before. And also gathering information about the expenditure. So if you're selected for review, there will be a meeting with CRA. It's usually a joint technical and financial review. The meetings these days, post-COVID, are remote, and CRA will provide an agenda letter for the meeting and essentially a request for information where they will ask questions, they'll ask for supporting documents. The information is uploaded through your My Business account, so very important to have everything in order with your My Business account before filing your SR&ED claim. CRA during the review meeting will usually provide a brief overview of the SR&ED program. That can be anywhere from 30 minutes to 45 minutes, talking about the criteria. And then depending on how many projects you've submitted, they will get into the details of the projects. You will typically want to have your engineers or developers or science individuals present during the meeting. CRA is more concerned with the experimental work and less concerned with the business and the operations and the product and the features and functionality. They really want to hear about the systematic investigation, and so that they can determine whether you've established a true technological uncertainty versus just doing routine development. So that's key. Once CRA has gathered all the information during the review meeting, they will then take away that info and write a project eligibility report, and they'll give you a determination in that proposal, along with a summary of adjustments that basically is a result of the information they've received from you, the company. And once you've received that, you have 30 days to respond to CRA with additional information. So the initial review meeting is not a be-all or end-all. After the 30-day period to respond, CRA will usually take another couple of weeks to go through that info. And then again, they could just decide to stick with their initial determination, or they may change their determination. After the review process, if you don't agree with CRA, then there's an appeals process called objections. And so that's where you file a notice of objection. There's a year plus 90 days from the date on your notice of assessment to file the objection. And it does take a long time for CRA internally to look at those objections. It's usually 2 to 3 years for a decision. They assign an independent science advisor to have a second look at technical eligibility, if that's what you disagree with. If it's a financial issue, it's usually a quicker turnaround. The notice of objection letter must address issues using new information. So if CRA doesn't think there's new information with your objection, then they're just going to uphold their original determination. And then beyond the objection process, the recourse following that is to go to tax court. The tax court appeal can be filed 90 days after the objection is accepted, and you would typically engage a tax lawyer to help write the appeal. Some cases will go to trial. Other cases may be settled, depending on the strength of your claim. So the last point on that is documentation must be solid and demonstrate the systematic investigation. A judge is going to assess eligibility according to the Income Tax Act and whether there is a technological advancement. The judge in tax court needs to understand the technological uncertainty, why it's uncertain, why just taking information from the public domain and applying it to your development scenario did not resolve the problem. And just a quick overview of some common mistakes with submissions. Sure. It could be that the tax schedules are not filled in correctly or missing information. That could be problematic given the 18-month filing deadline. If you're still within that 18 months, then you can refile. Poor documentation is another issue that CRA will come across, especially with first-time claimants. There could also be misunderstandings on eligibility. And so not every R&D project will qualify. This is because most SR&ED projects are a subset of an R&D project. And anything that's routine in nature or done according to standard practice is usually the R&D project. The SR&ED project is where you've identified that technological uncertainty and encountered a technological obstacle. Another mistake, describing the work incorrectly. So certain terms CRA could misinterpret. For example, if it's an IT software project and you mention optimization, optimization is viewed by CRA as routine. That's something that software developers do all the time. So just be very careful with the words that you choose. The work needs to be described at the correct level. If it's too high a level, then it could be discussing features and functionality and the product development. And those aren't the things that CRA are assessing for SR&ED eligibility. They want the details, the lower level details. If the work is described at too low a level, CRA could attempt to assess each activity as those should embody a SR&ED project in and of themselves. Another common mistake is overlooking eligible costs. So you want to ensure all potential SR&ED expenditures are accounted for. And we talked about those three categories: the salaries and wages, the contract payments, and materials. And missing deadlines is also problematic. The 18-month hard filing deadline is based on the company's fiscal year end, but typically you want to get your SR&ED claim in with your tax return. So those initial first 6 months after your fiscal year end, in order to receive the benefit of CRA's quicker service standard. And that's basically it, the SR&ED program. That's a high level overview. Are there any questions?
Well, Jamie, thank you very much. I think it's just a very well comprehensive explanation of the basics, and not only the basics, but also tips of the SR&ED program. And yes, I believe now it's time to answer some questions from our chat. Let's have a look what we have. Okay, Liam asks, what project is considered shreddable?
Yes, so from your candidate list of projects, not every project or R&D project may be eligible, as we discussed. So we need to determine if it meets the three criteria. The first and most important criteria being technological uncertainty. So again, it can't be a look around the corner uncertainty. We didn't know how to do it, or it's never been done before. A project may be complex and difficult and challenging, but if the know-how exists to resolve the issue that you've encountered, then it probably is not a technological uncertainty. So that's key. And then if you have established a technological uncertainty, from that point, that's when the clock starts on SR&ED. And any activities related to resolving the uncertainty would qualify from that point on.
I see.
You must have a systematic investigation as well. CRA does not consider trial and error a systematic investigation because it's trying things at random. They want your investigation to essentially be a science experiment. So you've got your hypothesis, which is your idea about how to resolve the uncertainty. You've got your iterations. You are testing your hypothesis. You do some analysis. You determine whether or not that approach works, and there may be some metrics associated with that you can cite. And conclusions, essentially. That is what they expect to see as a systematic investigation. So it's essentially a science experiment. And then the third criteria, the advancement, is the new knowledge that you gained by going through that process.
Thank you. We have another questions, and Yes, Stephanie wants to know, what are the limitations in claiming SR&ED?
There's no cap on the dollars. So SR&ED is legislated. If you've done the work, you're entitled to the tax credits by law. I mean,
Right.
subject to CRA's assessment of whether it meets the criteria. There's no cap on the expenditures for a SR&ED project. However, there are some caps and limitations that affect the rate of the SR&ED credit.
Right. So another question. Now it's from Jennifer. How long is the process going to take?
Yeah, it's typically 3 to 6 months, depending on whether you're reviewed by CRA. If you've been making claims for a number of years and CRA is comfortable with your submissions, you've had some success, then it could take less than 3 months. Some tax returns where the SR&ED is filed with the tax return are approved in a couple of weeks.
That's promising. Okay, that's a very simple and bold one, but important, from Jared. How do we get our refund?
So if your claim is approved, it will be confirmed in your notice of assessment that you receive, and it will indicate the SR&ED amounts, and CRA will process your claim and provide a check. So if it's a refund, you'll receive the check in the mail. And if you're set up for direct deposit, then CRA will just deposit the refund directly to your bank account on file. If you're in a taxable position, meaning that you have tax owing, then CRA will apply your SR&ED refund to the tax owing, and then any delta in that amount, if there is one, will be refunded by either of those two methods, by check or to your bank account.
I see. Right. Let's just take one more. Okay, from Brian. How much credit or refund are we expecting?
So for employees, it's 68 cents on the dollar. For contractors, 32 cents on the dollar. And again, depending on which province you're in, there's different provincial rates for the SR&ED credit. The federal rate is 35%. But overall, in general, 40% is your rule of thumb for all expenditures.
Thank you very much, Jamie. I think that's it. The rest we've covered during this session. It was a pleasure of mine to having you today to talk about such an important, actually, support from the government to help your scientific projects flourish in Canada.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. It's a great program, and Canadian companies should be taking advantage of it. It's especially new companies. It's a very helpful program.
Just a little question from me. If any of the guys who watched us today would like to reach out to you and know more about the SR&ED program, how can they do that?
Yeah, so our website is www.crossdynamix.com. That's CrossDynamix. My email is jamie.dowd@crossdynamix.com. My phone number is 416-725-6813. And feel free to reach out anytime.
Thank you very much, Jamie. I believe that our audience received many valuable insights today, and it will help them in their aspirations to move to Canada. That's it for today, folks. Thanks everyone who joined us on this webinar, and stay tuned for more tips on running a successful business in Canada.